Welcome to the Carey Nieuwhof Leadership Podcast on YouTube. My name is Carey Nieuwhof, and my goal is to help you lead like never before. So what I do every week is I sit down with world-class leaders and church leaders, business leaders, and I talk to them about what made them who they are and try to have the conversation with them that you would have if you got to sit down for lunch with them or have dinner with them or really got to spend some time with them. So we go into the backstory and we explore what made them who they are and some of the principles they've learned along the way. So if you enjoy this episode, I would love for you to like it, to subscribe, and also to share it with your friends. And in the meantime, here's today's episode. Mike, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Carey. Super fired up to be on it.
Yeah, this was fun because we got introduced by a past guest, and yet I found out you're also a listener, which is fun. Nice to have listeners who we get to turn the microphone on. And you got a fascinating story and fascinating leadership journey. So really excited.
Yeah, absolutely. I've listened to a lot of your episodes and have been a loyal fan, and I share it to many people. So I love what you're putting out there. Hopefully this could be another episode that impacts others.
Well, and you've had a fascinating life. So you're how old right now as we're doing this interview?
When this goes out, I'll probably be 32. So I'll turn 32 next month.
Okay. So barely 32, which is amazing. But you came from a very tough background, working poor, great parents, but just not a whole lot of money in your background. And tell us about Cutco knives, because your life changed when you were a teenager with Cutco knives, and that kind of launched a trajectory that has defined your last 15-ish years. So do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. My father got sick when I was in my teens, and at 17, I felt the call to help provide for my family and lighten the burden. And so a friend told me about Cutco knives, and they said I could make a good career for myself or make a lot of money. And so I was forced to grow up faster than other people. I started selling Cutco knives. Woke up at the crack of dawn every morning, started making cold calls, asked the teachers to go to the bathroom during class, sat outside of the lunchroom, made cold calls, and I became one of the top salespeople in Cutco's history.
In their history at 17. So you got like 40-year-olds who are selling Cutco knives too, right?
Yeah. There was about, from what I understand, 5,000 to 10,000 people per year that sell Cutco knives.
And at 17, you become one of their top salespeople.
At 17, that year, I was the number one salesperson in the company. Yeah, at 17. And so I just learned how to build and run a true business. So while other friends were playing high school sports and Xbox, right, I was learning how to build pipeline and building cold call scripts and how to build rapport with people and do a sales pitch and negotiate and get referrals and learn how to do time management and facing objections. And, just like people say that a child like Justin Bieber, when he faces such difficulties because he started his career at such a young age, I think the same went for me, right? I started my career at such a young age. I started making six figures in high school, and gold and glory really became my God and my identity.
Man, there's so many places I could go. I want to ask you, how did you teach yourself at 17? Like, how do you learn that stuff? A lot of 35-year-olds have trouble trying to figure out how to build a sales funnel. A lot of 55-year-olds have trouble figuring that stuff out. How did you teach yourself? Or did they teach you? Or what did that look like?
I think it was a plethora of a lot of things. One was my father was a salesperson.
Okay.
I saw it firsthand. I never got to see his skills at work in terms of how to negotiate and build rapport and all that. But I did see the work ethic and the perseverance and the grit and the hustle. And so I knew, or I believed, that in order to be good at anything, it's going to take a lot of effort. So I probably got that from him. I was surrounded by a lot of books. So I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I read other sort of sales books like Zig Ziglar and anything I get my hands on that was available at that time. I was always very, very meticulous and relentless at being surrounded by the best people in the company. So I would reach out to the prior salespeople that were always number one, and I would just say, "Can you teach me?" And many times when you ask people, "Can I just come alongside and can you teach me?" They many times say, "Of course, I'm willing to do that." Right. And then probably lastly is I had to succeed. Right. We had no other option. So when your back's against the wall, that's when your true colors show. So probably a mixture of all of that.
So you obviously had a lot of yeses, but I'm always curious because if you look at one of the themes for a lot of our guests, there had to be some no's along the way. I imagine you didn't close every sale. As a 17-year-old, how did you handle the no's when they came your way, the limits?
My manager got me into a mindset that she made me obsessed with no's. I mean, we would celebrate no's. I mean, it would be high five.
Really? Okay. I knew there was something there just intuitively, but tell me more.
It was amazing. It really was. So, I mean, I remember I gave a keynote once at an annual conference at Cutco. And I started off by saying, I guarantee you by all the money I've made this year that I have had more people hung up on me, not show or say no to me than anyone in this room. So I've experienced failure this year more than anyone in the room, yet I was still the number one salesperson. And so it was this whole mindset that, again, going back to my manager, that she taught me that Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant, she could guarantee has missed more shots than anyone on the planet. It's simply because they've taken more attempts. Naturally, obviously, their conversion is going to go higher, but they've taken so many attempts and they've mastered the skills so well that their mindset is becoming obsessed with failure because failure is an equation to success, right? And so I would know that if I had 8 no's, that would average out to 2 yeses, right? And so it was just all a numbers game. And I still treat it like that even today.
Isn't that fascinating? You know, that is a pattern of early success for a lot of people. I'm thinking about Ryan Hawk, who was a previous guest. We'll link to him in the show notes. And he had the tough job when his football career didn't work out of having to sell LexisNexis cold. I think it's a legal product. I'm pretty sure that was his brand. And he's like a whole bunch of no's, right? And that actually made him one of the most successful people in his 30s that you'd want to meet. Interesting. How did you not, was it your manager? Like, how did that not get into your head?
Oh, it definitely gets into your head. That's why it's so critical having good coaches, right? For me, I mean, I grew up with low income. I was overweight, Spanish, very bad stutter. I was on disability, right? So in my mind, I've always had a lot of these little boy complexes, right? And so I was always just trying to prove myself. And so when I got a no, it really rocked me, right? But along the way, what you realize, one of 2 things. One is that not everyone has to say yes, right? So that's just fact. Not everyone has to say yes. So failure is okay. Right? It's okay to take a couple strikeouts. So that's just the fact of it. And the second thing was, and this is more of the relentlessness in me, is when I got a no, I would do everything in my power to convert it to a yes. So I would just not lose hope on the no, I guess is the premise of it.
How would you do that? If I tell you no, how do you change that into a yes?
I would just try to understand why, you know? So even now with my current company and we have investors, right? When I speak to some investors and they're just like, no, I'm not interested in investing. I'm just like, okay, that's totally fine. I'm just curious why. And when you keep asking why, oh, that's interesting. Why? Oh, tell me more, right? They'll quickly tell you something that may have been misconstrued or misunderstood, right? It's they misunderstood what you were trying to portray to them. So many times my investors would say something that I would say, oh, no, that's not our model. That's maybe what you would think in a private equity model. That's the opposite of our model. And they go, oh, really? And so the more and more that you try to understand the true root cause of why they're saying no, right? The higher likelihood that there is to a yes, right? And if it should be a no, then it should be a no. So a lot of times I would have people tell me while selling Cutco knives, I'll be completely honest with you. We are in a very difficult financial situation. We're in debt up to our eyeballs. My husband just lost their job. And I would say, I completely understand. And here's a knife or here's a scissors just to remember me. Right. And so when you just ask the why, and what that does, that builds trust. And then later, when you ask for recommendations or referrals, now that you built a relationship with them, right, they want to help you support what you're doing.
And they'll never forget that knife, even if it was a $20 knife or a $30 pair of scissors or whatever. I don't know how much that stuff costs, but like, they'll never forget that.
I remember when I was single and I was dating and courting around, and I would be dating girls, and I got a lot of no's, right? And I would just bring Cutco straight into school, into my university. And if I would ask a girl on a date and she would say no, I'd say, why? Why? And I was always find out the true reason why, right? And so I would never just take a no and walk away.
Isn't that great? Yeah, so you mentioned you were overweight, and I know when we talked about it when we first met, you'd mentioned that. I would say you're thin. Like you're not just like, oh yeah, I lost 20 pounds. Like you look fit, you look thin. When did that happen? How did that happen? Why did that happen?
How did that happen? I grew up in a Puerto Rican family that my family used to feed me rice and beans and anything else and 5 servings of it because to my mother, food is love. So that's how it happened.
I guess I meant it the other way. How did you decide to, because as somebody who's always been like, boy, I should lose 5 pounds, 10 pounds. I'm just curious how you lost the weight more than anything.
I remember reading this book by Matthew Kelly. And the first line in the book is everything in life is a choice. And that rocked me when I was a young kid. I think I was probably 14 or 15 years old at that point. And I was just like, okay, it's a choice. And so I said, let's start backwards. If I want to be 170 pounds, what has to be true? It's like, well, I have to work out and I have to eat good. And it was more of a lifestyle change. And so I just made the decision and I reverse engineered it. And I just said, okay, I'm going to stop eating bad. I'm going to get on the treadmill every day. And that's just what I did. It wasn't much more to it, it just became a lifestyle. And so now, many years later, I'm probably 175 pounds and it's just a lifestyle. It's not a diet.
How old were you when you made that decision?
Probably about 13 or 14.
Oh, good for you. Good for you. So there's a profile here, lots of success. You had a lot of money, 6-7 figures-ish by the time you were what? How old?
I was making 6 figures ever since I was 17. I made my first 7 figures there in my mid-20s.
Wow. And like so many headlines, it almost ruined you. Early success, right? Almost took you under. Do you want to walk us through what happened? What does that kind of income, options, success, fame, you're speaking across the country, you're being profiled. What did that do to you? And what happened?
Yeah, I mean, the positive impact of that early on success was that I was able to ease a financial burden on my family. And I was blessed enough to discover my God-given ability of networking with others and selling at a young age, which I believe there's a beauty in sales if you go about it a redemptive way, which I know many in their 40s and 50s that have yet to discover their God-given ability. So I thank God every day that he put me into that situation where I was forced to figure out what it was that I was naturally skilled at. So that was a positive thing. On the negative part of having that early on success was that I was my own God, right? Someone recently asked me when it's the most difficult to trust, need, and rely on God. And I quickly answered when everything is going well from the outside and you're experiencing worldly success, right? Because you don't need God if you have the money, if you have the connections, if you have the resources. So it became a pursuit of pride, pleasure, and possessions, right? Which ultimately became just a never-ending spiral of dissatisfaction, right? So once you have that fancy car you've always wanted, or once you could travel to those fancy places internationally that you've only seen online, and once you've stood on the stage at delivering the keynotes to thousands of people, you realize that we all have this God-sized hole in us that none of those things in this world could fill, right? That there has to be something more fulfilling and purposeful.
Wow. And you've been around a lot of successful people and you've seen the good and the bad and the ugly with successful people. What did you see? Because you ended up working with, and I don't know whether you want to name names or whatever, but with like some very successful people whose names we would know. And you saw the shadow side of success as well. What did you see, when you were in your 20s and getting up into those circles? Because I feel like I saw some of that in law in downtown Toronto for the year I worked in law, and I saw some of the most successful people in the country making ridiculous amounts of money, and on the inside, it was like exactly what you said. They weren't happy. And what did you see in your journey?
That was the same exact thing that I saw. Yeah, it was from the outside in. I mean, I worked directly for a couple billionaires that we all know their names, and or many of us know their names. And from the outside in, I was blown away that I had the opportunity to be their right-hand person, right, their chief of staff. And I remember just bragging about it to my now wife, or my mother, father, best friends, and so forth. And then once you're there for a week, a month, a year, 5 years, you realize when you get up close and personal, it's not all that it's made out to be, that it's made out to be. There's a lot of messiness there. There's a lot of brokenness there. There's a lot of emptiness there. Someone recently told me, if you look at someone, they're wildly, wildly successful. The first question that you should ask yourself is, what is it that is truly driving that? Right? What is it that is truly driving that? And so I just got an up close view that these families, many times, of these leaders were not being well cared for, that the wives were not spending a lot of time with their husbands, that they were the first ones in there and the last ones out, that their health was going down the drain, that they were not very generous, right? That there was not a lot of joy. Right? All of these things that I saw, that I said, I don't want that, right? Those were the bad things that, don't make the cover of Business Insider or Wall Street Journal, right? And then, of course, the good things about them is there's many great things about them, and how they build companies and scale and care for people at their companies, and great investors, and all of that great things, But in terms of what matters most at the end of our lives when we're in the rocking chair in the 80s and 90s, right? I learned a lot of what I don't want.
What would you, because this is a question that really haunts me too. I would characterize myself as a driven person. And one of the questions you have to ask is like, okay, what does drive you? Yeah. What would you say was driving you in your teens and early 20s? And how is that different from what you would say is driving you now?
Yeah, I wanted to prove myself that I mattered. I wanted to prove myself that I was worthy, that I wasn't this overweight, stuttering kid on disability, that his parents went to private school because the only way I'm there is on disability, and we have one hubcap with no air conditioning. I wanted people to respect me. I wanted to be admired. I wanted to be just looked at for my accomplishments. And so I would run through a brick wall, regardless of what shattered around me, just to get the approval of others, right? Which is just this, it's the saddest thing ever, because it never stops. You're never satisfied, and you're just running on margin, and those around you are just seeing you disintegrate before their very own eyes, right? And so that's what was driving me, was this little child boy insecurities that haunt you until you really have someone, I believe, usher you through your deepest insecurities, and they help you rebuild your foundation from sand to rock, right? That's what radically changed my story.
How did that happen? That pivot, that change?
There were a couple of things. When we sold our first company to Dell, the money hit my bank account, and I thought that was going to be a euphoria, and nothing changed at that moment. All the change is a different number on your Chase app, right?
So you had built a new company after you left Cutco and then sold it to Dell?
Correct. That's correct. Wow. So I was part of a new startup, and we sold that to Dell. And so when that happened, I was like, when that happens, my parents get a new house, we get a new house. That's when I just kick my feet back. I'm just so happy. And then it happens. You're just like, man, the hole just got bigger, Wow. And this whole thing in my mind is, you're not enough. You're not enough. Take more control, right? Take more control. Be busier. Meet more people, right? Think about the future. Don't be present, right? Perform. Be a machine. Prove yourself, right? All of these things just never stops. And it's like this talk show in your head that just never turns on, right? It's a hamster on the wheel that's just going to die on that wheel. And so the way that I got well was one of my best friends, Brett Hagler, the CEO and my co-founder of News Story. He invited me to Haiti. And that's where I just had a new profound faith in Jesus. And I just stopped following my last way of life, and I just started following him. And that just allowed me down this journey of just saying, who is this man named Jesus? What does he say about me? How did he walk? How did he live? What is it that he believed? And let me start living and acting more like that. And so I've done just a lot of things. I do some silent retreats every year, and I just get still, which for someone like me that's so hyper at all times, going, getting those healthy rhythms are really important. Spiritual direction, counseling. It's silly that we see all these football players and athletes and musicians. They have so many coaches, Yet we look at ourselves and we don't have any. I mean, it's the most unbelievable thing. And so I look at my life and I say, I need a spiritual coach. I need a business coach. I need a family coach. I need a marital coach, right? And so by getting a lot of that help, I'm on this path of sanctification of just becoming a healthier version of myself.
Just a quick note to leaders, those of you who don't know Brett Hagler, he'll be on the show at some point. I met him a couple of years ago, and we got together at South by Southwest 2019. He does some incredible work at News Story, so you'll hear from him. It's really, really cool. So that is a massive change. And you do have some ministry leaders listening, and they're like, wow, that's what I hope for. That's what I pray for. Like, that's what you want to see in your church. That's what you want to see in people's lives. Sometimes a value set doesn't change that quickly. Like, I feel like for what sounds like happened in a couple of years for you, I've been like decades in the making, like redeeming those motivations and all that. Any thoughts on why that change or how that change became relatively rapid for you?
Yeah. I mean, I hate to say it because this is not going to relate to probably the majority of listeners. But for me, I heard the true gospel and I experienced the true gospel in 2013, and it radically changed everything. And I just naturally told myself, if this is the truth, then I'm going all in. If it's not, I'm just going to keep living all in the way I'm already doing. Right. Wow. And so I kind of wish, because I just went to a retreat in Colorado, as you know, Carey, last week. And there's many people there that they grew up in the church. And it's just sad to see how the gospel story and the power of Jesus kind of it's like, yeah, I've heard that forever. I know, that his burden's light, right? I know that he's the living water and I won't thirst no longer, right? And everything else, right? And that he's the way and the truth, everything, but what other book can I read or what else can I do? And for me, when I experienced it, I was like, oh my goodness, this is like gold. I'm all in. Nothing else matters. Like I'm all in. So I kind of wish that nobody heard the gospel until they truly experienced living the world for like 20 or 30 years. Because if they did, I think there would be a lot higher probability that they would just be so all in and sold out. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And, I wonder if a brush with success, and I more saw it than experienced it in that year in law, but being in those bank towers, those office towers in our financial center for my country, Canada, and seeing the poverty as you saw, when you met some of the people who make headlines, and it's like, oh, it's not what it seems like from the outside. That was like a slap in the face for me, Mike. And it was like, this gospel thing is something utterly different. And it made it easier to walk away, right?
It is. The number one summary of, I love that you said the poverty of, call it the C-suite, or the poverty of the ultra rich, right? The number one verse that I love is, for what good is it to gain the whole world and forfeit your soul? I mean, that is it. And we could just stop that entire conversation there, because that verse is so spot on. For what good is it for a man to gain the whole world, enter the name here, and forfeit his soul? Mm-hmm. Right. And so once you experience that, you're just like, all right, I don't need the whole world. I just want to focus on the soul.
So here's what's interesting. All right. You had a set of drivers as a child and a teenager that made you radically successful at 17 into your mid 20s. You had this massive life change that happened as a result of, this meeting of Jesus, going to that trip in Haiti, radical life change, but you're still driven. I mean, we're going to talk about your journey from your startup to Dell to DocuSign to your new venture. And, that's a lot of miles in just a few years, right? In 7 or 8 years, that's a lot of change. What would you say drives you now? Like, how has that drivenness been redeemed? Because you're still starting things. You're still very driven. What's the difference?
Absolutely. I read a book by actually the gentleman that introduced you and I, Pat Gelsinger, CEO of VMware. He wrote a book a long time ago called The Juggling Act: How to Balance Your Family, Faith, and Work. And in one of the early chapters, he highly encourages all the readers to create a mission statement for their life. And so I did that years ago, and that's what drives me. And so I think about it probably weekly, is Mike Arrieta is a faithful son of God, knowing there's nothing more I can do to earn his love. I'm a faithful and loving husband to my wife. I'm a present and engaged father to my kids. I'm a loving family member, and I strive to make an eternal impact on the world around me. And so that's what drives me, is I just want to be a son. I want to be a husband. I want to be a father, and I want to strive to make an eternal impact on the world around me.
I like that.
So I would encourage people, if you don't know where you're trying to go, it's impossible to get there. Right. So set that destination very, very clearly, right? It doesn't have to be perfect. And then everything else steers it. So sometimes I ask myself, if I'm going deep in a hole of my little boy self, I call it, right, to try to prove my little boy self, I look at my mission statement, I go, am I trying to earn more of God's approval? Am I actually a faithful husband right now? Am I actually even present or engaged to my children? Am I loving with my family right now or not? I'm not even spending time with them, right? Oh, okay. I'm just focusing on work, and it's not even an eternal impact, right? And so it's that true north that always fixes your gaze on the direction that you want to go.
Yeah, and ministry can do that as easily as business. I think a lot of us can be driven I know that's part of my own story. It's like, you got to always redeem the motives. So you go from your own.
Carey, on that point, I just want to make a quick comment, or worse. Ministry. Okay. I have so many brothers and sisters in ministry, and it's the first thing that I tell anyone that's going to be a pastor or going into ministry is watch over your marriage. Be very careful over your marriage, because in the business world, if I work too much, I have brothers quickly telling me, hey, Mike, you're being a workaholic. Your family's at risk. Your marriage is at risk. Okay. In the ministry world, right? They don't call many pastors workaholics. They just say they're serving.
Look at how hard he works.
You're so faithful. Look how hard you're working. Your congregation needs you right now, right? There's this divorce happening. There's this happening. There's this. We got to raise money for another ministry, a new building, all this thing. So it's hey, I'm just doing this for the glory of God. He just calling me right now in the season. And their marriages, their spouses are being neglected many times, right? And they never went out trying to do that, right? So you just as careful as us in the marketplace have to be of not becoming workaholics, right? And staying true to our original design, I call it, right? And that true north sort of mission. In the ministry world, you need to be almost doubly as purposeful and as on guard as that, right? To not be a workaholic and not get your identity in what you do.
It's way more subtle, but it may actually be way more deadly too, when you think about the implosion that happens. Because in business, sadly, marriages come and go, people move in or out, and people get hurt, but it tends to be a smaller circle. In ministry, when that happens, hundreds, thousands of people get hurt. Tens of thousands of people get hurt. So I hear you.
One of our family values is give it your best, not your all. Because if you give anything your all, you have nothing left to give. Right? So give it your best, not your all. Because if you give anything your all, you have nothing left to give. So don't give work your all. Just give it your best and let God handle the rest.
Well, and it's your ministry, not your faith. There's a distinction, right? Like at a certain point, I am a Christian, but I am not. Yeah, I am the church. I know that theologically, but you know what I mean? There is a point at which you will not lead a ministry perhaps as actively as you do, but you will always have your personal ministry. So, wow. Okay. Fun divergence to talk about that. And I think you touched a lot of leaders with that. So let's pick up, if you're ready to go to your journey again. So you go from your startup to Dell Computers, and then you acquire this little startup in Silicon Valley, DocuSign, and you get assigned as one of the first staff to a company that I think a lot of us know, right? DocuSign. So what were some of the lessons you learned in the early days of a startup in Silicon Valley almost a decade ago?
Yeah, and just for clarification, Dell Computers acquired our first startup called Wise, and then I left Dell, and then I joined a little startup called DocuSign.
Gotcha. Okay. Gotcha.
But yeah, I learned a lot of things. I learned a lot as working in these companies, and then now as an investor and venture capitalist and private equity. I'll boil it down to, I think, probably 4 things. The first thing I learned is that you must hire very smart people, right? If you want to tackle very complex problems, you have to hire wicked smart people. Coming up through Cutco, I thought it was all about grit and drive and perseverance, as I mentioned. However, when you're trying to build a global company that touches hundreds of millions of people, and that's the vision, you must build a high performance team comprised of people that are high capacity, right? High IQ.
Can I ask you, like, as we go along, just 1 or 2 sub questions on these? Because this is a question we get a lot around here, which is like, how do you find those people? I know there's a talent war going on, particularly if you're like hyper smart, hyper, strategic people. Did you have any keys to help you identify, find, and recruit those people?
Yes. Anything and everything. So anything and everything. So I'll give you an example now, that's just a real life example from a couple of weeks ago. So at my current company, Garden City, we're hiring a vice president, right? And so what's the strategy on hiring people that are the ideal team player, right? That Patrick talks about.
Yeah.
Hungry, humble, and smart, right? And so one thing that we do is we just post it online, post it on our website. Now that's what most people do, but guess what? As much as you think, people are not going to your website that much, right? So it's not going to get that much attraction, right? Number 2 is we post it on all social platforms. Now, the path of least resistance does not work well when you want to attract the best people. So just going on LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter and just saying we're hiring and putting a bunch of text, that does not work. So we recorded a video, right? That I went on a video. It took me 90 seconds. I just said, hi, everyone. I'm Mike with Garden City, and here's the position that we're hiring for. That video, Carey, got 9 or probably by now 10,000 views.
Wow.
We got 200 applicants on that video alone, right? Number 3 is we reach out to anyone and everyone and we say, hey, if you know anyone that fits these specific criterias, please forward it to them, right? So we engage our network. And then lastly, we reach out to a lot of recruiters and we just say, we're not going to sign a retainer with you, right? We're not going to do anything like that. But if you bring us someone and we end up hiring them, we're glad to pay you that fee. So you have to turn over any and all rocks, right? And obviously we have a very small staff, but at DocuSign, we had a very large staff. We had a very, very generous incentive that if you recruited anyone and you referred anyone, you would get a couple $1,000s for recruiting that person. So you would have all of our 5,000 employees always trying to make a couple $1,000.
They're always recruiters. It's like, here's our Christmas money, honey. Yeah.
Always recruiters. And they don't want to recruit bad people because then it falls on them, which so they don't want to.
That's a great idea.
You just have to have many tools in the arsenal, and figure out what works best for you. But the whole go on Career Builder and post it on there and go on LinkedIn Sales Navigator or whatever and post it on there, those days are long gone. And you're only going to get people primarily that you're not going to want 90% of.
Okay, that's great. So that's lesson number 1. Super helpful there.
Yeah. So it's all about having very wicked smart people. The second thing I learned in Silicon Valley is start small. So there's riches in the niches. Don't be everything to everyone. We had a consultant, an author named Jeffrey Moore. He created something called the bowling alley strategy. And this is where you find a niche where there's a problem and it's more easily able to overcome, and then find ways to hop from that niche into other niches. And eventually you're in the whole broader market. So we did this at DocuSign. We started off by just doing e-signatures in just real estate. If you're buying a house, you use DocuSign, right? I would wear a DocuSign hoodie. People would say, DocuSign, I love DocuSign. I bought a house at DocuSign. Now, if I wear a DocuSign hoodie, people would say, I just bought my Tesla with it, or I just signed a new loan with it, or I bought a cell phone. There's 100 things. So once we knocked down the pin of real estate, we went into banking and insurance and automotive and telecommunications. And now that all the pins are knocked down, we're the global standard. Uber did the same thing. They started in 1 city and then 2 cities and then 3. And that's the way they continued. They did the same exact thing with Uber Eats, right? Last one is eBay. eBay started with collectibles like a flea market. Right. And they had this thing called an other category. They monitored this other category for trends. And once they saw a momentum behind a particular trend or behind a particular niche, They then built an infrastructure to cater to that niche, right? And that's how they became the largest electronics marketplace, a fashion retail warehouse, and the biggest car dealership in the world, right? If you would have asked me in the early days, would eBay sell cars and fashion? You'd say you're crazy, right? And so the riches and the niches, knock down one pin and focus on the others.
Can I just ask you one supplement on that? Because we run into this all the time on our channels too. People are saying, but Mike, I want to reach everybody. Like we want to reach everybody. Like you can't just exclude people. What would you say to the leader who's thinking, yeah, I get that, but that's too small. I want to reach everybody.
Yeah, it's just a tipping point. I suggest you read about the bowling alley. I suggest you read Peter Thiel's book, 0 to 1. I'd rather be impactful to a loyal 100 than unloyal 50 or unloyal 1,000, right? So figure out how you could build a raving group of fanatic fans that they love your offering and they gladly will pay anything that you charge and they gladly will share what you're doing with others so that your marketing dollars are as low as possible, right? So I would say if you want to be everything to everyone, show me a case study where that has worked well, right? And until then, I could show you 1,000 that when they follow this bowling alley specific, you're a podcast, Carey, right? You have a very specific focus, right? And that's probably one of the reasons why it's so well thought of. When I listen to it, I immediately know who else I want to share this with. And you immediately know who else you want to interview on it, right? You know your gaze, you know your focus.
Yeah. And that is really hard because the path to everyone starts with one or two. It's like, I don't know, you probably read Kevin Kelly's 1,000 True Fans, something I recommend over and over again. But it's that whole idea that all you need to do is build a small tribe of 1,000 people and you probably have a viable organization. And, that doesn't mean 1,000 attendants if you're a church leader, but just 1,000 people who are affiliated. It's not that hard to do. But the enemy of that is trying to reach everybody and please everybody. So great lesson. Okay. Anything else from Silicon Valley?
Yeah. I think number 3 is very important is I've learned that instead of competing against your biggest competitors, find creative ways to partner there with them, right? Even if it's inviting them to invest in your company, right? At DocuSign, instead of viewing FedEx, which everyone said, oh, well, you're taking FedEx out of business because you no longer need to send things to get signed. We reached out to them and we said, would you like to be strategic partners of ours? And they invested in our company and they became large equity owners. Wow. Lyft did the same exact thing with General Motors in 2016. They invested $500 million. It's very creative, right? You do not want to be the Blockbuster that had a chance to purchase Netflix for $50 million, but they passed because they thought they could do it better and on their own, right? They would have benefited much greater together. So that's just a very big learning lesson I realized in Silicon Valley is that many people think that they're all competing, but what they're really doing is they're all partnering together for the most part.
Does that somehow, and maybe it's a totally different theme, but does that somehow tap into scarcity versus abundance mentality?
I absolutely think so. Yeah. Okay. Think about in the church world. I have a friend that's planning a new church here in Atlanta. And one of the things we talked about is it like focus on an abundance mindset, not scarcity, right? The entire population's millions here, right? It's not a competition of your church is going to be at 8,000, there's going to be at 10, and maybe they go to 9 and you go to 10, right? There's abundance out there. We have a generous God, right? Let's find a way that we could figure out what each other's strengths are and let's divide and conquer and be stronger together. Heck, let's even refer people and tell them you might be better suited at this specific church family. I mean, that's unheard of, right? And so again, partnering rather than competing, we're stronger together in the end. And then the last point is, this is specific to entrepreneurs raising capital. But when you're raising capital, actually, this goes to churches as well. When you're raising capital, integrate your corporate go-to-market strategy into your financing fundraising strategy. So what I mean by that is if you want to partner with a specific organization, invite those organizations or the executives at those organizations to invest in your company, to participate in your fundraising round. So at DocuSign, we always sat in a room and said, man, one day Salesforce and Google and Microsoft and Visa and T-Mobile, one day they'll use our product and one day they'll call us a partner and one day, they'll be on stage at our user conference. And we said, well, instead of saying one day, why don't we just call them and say, hey, do you want to write a check and be an investor in our company? And naturally, they all became customers and partners thereafter. Instead of just saying, we need anyone and everyone, okay, this bank or this venture capitalist, they don't provide much value, right? So why don't you first start to go after the impossibles that if they invested in your congregation or in your company or in your nonprofit, right after they invest, they could also add value by becoming a customer or a partner or an advocate or a marketing engine or whatever it may be. And then whatever is remaining left to fundraise, then you go to those that everyone starts with.
That's really counterintuitive. Also a little bit bold, right? Did you make any of those calls, or were you close to the people who made those calls to Google, or to like, how would a call like that go?
Yeah. Our CFO and I were the two responsible for that. And we would just call them and we would say, hey, Microsoft, a lot of people use Microsoft and a lot of people use DocuSign. We've been trying to call you guys for a long time to partner, but I know you guys have a lot of other things going on, right? We're currently raising some money to continue to build DocuSign. We're going to go to venture capitalists and raise a bunch of money. But before we do that, it would be our dream if you wanted to partner. And again, a lot of these companies, they have a large reserve of cash sitting there. So they're looking to make great investments. They go, yeah, I'll invest $5 million, $20 million. And so now they're a little tiny part owner of DocuSign.
Wow.
After they invest, we call them. We go, hey, partner, that you're an owner, part of our own company. Who should we talk to see if they want to buy DocuSign for the entire Microsoft corporation? They go, oh, you need to call Jim. He buys all of our software for Microsoft. We're like, well, that was a lot easier. So I tell every startup I speak to, I tell every single one, even church leaders that are thinking about raising their launch capital to launch a church. I go, instead of just asking anyone and everyone, who would be your dream 20 people in the city that if they invested in helping launch this church, you know, for the next 5 to 10 years, they would be the most influential people and helpful to help the sustainability of this church. Go after those first. And whatever is not yet fulfilled, then you go after everyone else, you know, but just this whole missional focus on being targeted of integrating your go-to-market strategy with your fundraising strategy.
Well, those are some great lessons on just the general thing. What did you learn about growth and you think not just about Silicon Valley, but Garden City, your time at Dell, the other companies. What have you learned about growth and scale in your time in leadership?
Yeah. Know who you are and know who you're not. And then go find the best person to fill your gaps. Bill Gates is a technologist. He needed Steve Ballmer to be the sales and marketing guy. Right. So from day one, right. That's one is know who you're not and know who you're not. Something else is be diligent. Talking about growth, be diligent about building repeatable standard operating procedures, right? You're the innovator, then find the integrator that could help you set up your reoccurring one-on-one meetings, your weekly kickoff meetings, your management meetings, your OKRs, your KPIs, right? So again, if you are the innovator, find someone that's the integrator to set up these repeatable standard operating procedures. And the other thing I learned about growth is surround yourself with trusted, like-minded advisors who have been there before, right? Learn from their mistakes and they will save you the headaches so that you don't have to be under the desk in the fetal position like they've been many times.
How did you figure out who you're not? Because we have a lot of people who lead smaller organizations, smaller churches, smaller businesses. And so they tend to attract generalists, right? Well, you don't understand, but when everybody leaves, I got to clean the bathroom, or I got to do the email myself, right? So how did you figure out who you're not? Because I found I've gotten a lot better as I've discovered, I'm actually only good at one or two things. I thought when I was in my 20s, I thought I was great at everything. And I'm like, I'm actually terrible at most things. And if I stick to my lane, I do better. So how did you figure out who you're not? And then what are you not?
Yeah. I just entered this journey probably a year and a half to 2 years ago. Until then, I replicate what you just said of, I'm great at everything. I'm a startup guy and I'm a growth guy and I'm also fundraise and I'm operations. Heck, I'm also sales, A through Z. And now the harsh reality is, I love what you just said. I'm actually pretty terrible at a lot of things, and I feel you on that one. How did I find out what I'm not? Two things. One is by cultivating an environment around me of direct, honest, and open communication. Direct, honest, and open communication. So this whole thesis or this whole thing around radical candor, if you've never heard of that, just go Google the Radical Candor book, or there's a woman in Silicon Valley that talks about this. But I really believe if you're going to be part of our company, or if you're going to be part of my community in terms of my friend, I want you to give me radical, direct, open, and honest candor. Tell me the things I'm great at. Tell me the things I am not good at all, right? And together, right, when you tell me that, we will be stronger together, right? So it's creating an environment like that. Another rule on that is, if it's bad feedback that I could develop on, tell me behind closed doors. If it's good things you want to praise me on, you could tell me that in front of open doors, right? So that's one, is cultivating an environment where people could give you radical candor. And the second thing is, we are in a day and age where it's phenomenal how much resource you get around personality tests, right? Mm-hmm. So I've taken the Strength Finder, I've taken the 5 Voices, the Enneagram, right? And they all of my results all show very similar things. Challenger, Pioneer.
Oh, so you're an 8?
Oh, I'm a hard
8. Yeah.
Yeah.
High five. Yeah. Same here. Yep.
And so through those two things.
Okay. Candor is hard. And I know what you mean by radical candor. That too has been a growth journey for me. We just literally had a 2-hour team meeting today where I'm like, permission to speak freely, permission to disagree. Go ahead, push back. What if it's a bad idea? Tell me where I'm wrong. That's been a learned journey for me. And you have to overcome a lot of insecurities to get there. How do you not let that get you down? Because I know so many leaders struggle with radical candor. It's like, tell me the truth. And then you tell them the truth and they're like, actually, I didn't want to hear that. So thank you. Or you get fired or whatever. How do you not let that get to your head?
Well, I think another question that probably a lot of people may be thinking is, okay, well, I tell everyone in my organization, let's have radical candor. Let's have direct, open, and honest communication. And then we open it up and there is none, right? Yeah. And so how do we actually cultivate an environment where people are vulnerable and transparent? I think of an ice analogy. So if you look at go up there to Canada and you go to a pond and it's frozen, well, you might have to hit that ice with a picket many, many times before you get to the water, right? So when you hit it the first time, you're not going to get to water. So you have to hit it. So what we do here at Garden City, or what we did at DocuSign, is I would exercise this. So the first thing is you need to be the leader that exemplifies what you're preaching. And so I give a lot of radical candor to people. I tell people, hey, you missed the mark on this. It was not good. Or, hey, you did not do this well. Or, hey, you should have done this, right? Or I was expecting you to do that. And it's uncomfortable for the first couple of times because they're your friends and you care for them and all that's true, right? But if you really care for them, you should tell them where they're missing the mark because they want to do good work that's meaningful and purposeful, right? So first thing is you do it. And the second thing is on your one-on-ones, you have to ask, give me feedback where I could be better to your subordinates, right? It's your direct reports, to your team. Now, naturally, what they're going to do is they're going to say, everything's going well.
You're doing a great job.
You're doing a great job. And then what you have to do is you have to keep hitting that ice and say, nope, I know I'm not perfect. No one's perfect. Tell me I could do better. Nothing can come to mind. Then I hit the ice again. I'm like, well, unfortunately, we're not going to the next question until you tell me where I could do better because I care for you way too much. And I know I'm missing the mark somewhere, And when you just sit there and you create that environment, they know what's in their head. They're just thinking, am I really going to say it? And so I just asked someone there recently and he told me, Mike, you're always late to our one-on-ones. Always. You're always late to our one-on-ones, and I'm always looking forward to them. I have a whole agenda and you walk in 15 minutes late. I know you're busy. I know you're dealing with other things, but I just wish you were on time. And I was like, wow, I never even thought about that. Right. But I had to ask him like 5 times, Carey, tell me how I could be better. He would have never told me otherwise. Right. And then in terms of how does it not get to you, you just have to realize that the only reason why it matters is you're trying to accomplish a true north, right? It goes back to Patrick Lencioni's book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. Go read it, right? 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. It's you, in order to be all rowing in the same direction, in order to be on a Navy SEAL Team 6, if someone misses a left turn on a mission, you're going to tell your team member, dude, you just missed a left turn. Like the mission is now in jeopardy. I care for you and us way too much to not tell you that you just missed that left turn.
So we've come through a year. You're doing a startup. We're going to get to Garden City in a second, but we've come through a year that's been just, scrambled eggs for most leaders. Hard, discouraging, unpredictable. And 2021, yeah, maybe there's a vaccine on the way, which is awesome, but like it's still an instability a lot of us are not accustomed to leading through. Leaders are hoping to make progress in 2021. Are there a couple of keys for you that seem to always lead to progress? Like what do most leaders miss when they get stuck? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think if they're getting stuck, I think that there's a lot of reasons on that. One, they may be afraid of dreaming. They themselves don't believe it's possible to turn the ship around. They only look at what can go wrong instead of saying what has to be true in order for this to go right. They don't surround themselves with people that are encouraging them. They don't surround themselves with a high performance team who are saying that they're committed to achieving the impossible, right? In terms of how to make progress, we always have a saying here is think big, break down, and execute, right? And I got that from Brett Hagler, is just think big, break down, and execute, right?
And he figured out how to print houses using 3D printing. So that's like thinking really big. Yeah.
Exactly, right? So that's a big idea. The big idea there was, how can we build a house in 24 hours for less than $3,000? I mean, that's thinking big, right? How can we build a house in a third world country for that amount in less than 24 hours? So, and then after that, you break it down and you go, okay, well, maybe it has to be a 3D printer, right? And then from there you execute, right? And you go, how do you build a 3D printer, right? And so whatever your company, organization, ministry is going through, right? Think big, break down, and execute. It's easy to get overwhelmed on a bunch of ideas and not get any true progress, right? So here's a good exercise I tell a lot of people. Write down all your ideas right now, right? Write down all your new initiatives that are running through your head right now. Let's just say it's 10. Force yourself to cross out 7 of them. Force yourself. Once you have that bottom top 3 ideas that you believe could truly help drive progress or help grow or sustain your organization, it is then your responsibility to bring them to your team and hear their perspectives, right? The number one leadership lesson, I believe, is people support what they help create. People support what they help create, right? If you want your team to support one of your initiatives, you must have them be part of the process, right? If they help create it, they will help support it. This alone, many times, will be the biggest breakthrough for leaders, right? They're saying, well, I have many ideas that they can help the organization. I pick one, and then it just doesn't happen. Right. Well, one, maybe you picked the wrong idea. So let's have a conversation with your team because they might have different perspectives. And 2, they feel like it's your idea, not their own. Right. They're not excited to work on it. Right. So that's what I would say. Give that a shot if you really want to make good progress heading into the new year.
Why do you think so many businesses get stuck or are just in that slow decline? Because you've been part of hyper growth. But when you look at others, why do you think so many people get stuck in that space?
I don't think they have a concise plan. Right? I think many people do ready, fire, and then aim. And so they don't have a concise plan of what is our vision? Why do we exist? What is our mission? Like, what do we actually do day in, day out? That's our mission, what we do. What are our values? Like, how do we go and live out that mission? What are our standards? What are the 15 to 30 standards that we do daily superior to our competition that we do in order to win? Who must I get on board in order to achieve this, right? Where do I find them? Right? How do I onboard them and actually make them part of this team, right? You cannot get anyone on board unless you have that why, right? Which is why I started with the vision and the why in the first place.
Ah, that's good.
Come up with that concise plan. And if you don't have a plan, Google it. Right?
Yeah. The internet has helped us with this stuff, right? And okay, so you had a brand new venture called Garden City. And my understanding, you get a lot of investors lined up and you're going to be buying up family-owned, small to mid-sized businesses. Because a lot of people have a passion, they love doing, let's say, a florist or something like that, or garden center, or what would be another example? Even I'm sure a garage, right? Like somebody repairs cars, or it could be somewhat small manufacturing firm. And I come from entrepreneurial family, small family-owned business, and I saw my parents go through that. But a lot of people struggle with the running of the business. So tell us about the vision for Garden City and what you hope to accomplish through it.
Yeah, sure. Garden City is a holding company, and we invest in family-owned service companies. We grow them and we hold them forever. So we have no intention of ever selling them. So it's this kind of Christian Berkshire Hathaway. If you know Warren Buffett's model, it's like that, but we focused on really putting a culture where all service workers could thrive, prosper, and flourish in God's image. So we're really just trying to create amazing jobs, and we're trying to modernize these companies to be modern and innovative and tech-enabled and efficient, right? And so that's what we do. We invest in all sorts of companies: just sanitation, janitorial, waste management, staffing companies, restoration, linen, right? Pest control, HVAC, plumbing, all those sort of things. Very, very sexy businesses. Right? We actually say boring is sexy to us. We love boring. Boring is beautiful, right? And to be clear, these businesses are not struggling, right?
Right.
Hey,
they're profitable. They don't need a big turnaround. Yeah.
Extremely profitable. They're growing every year. They have strong management teams. They have loyal customers. And I see this as the best place to drive real impact in this world. Where do we primarily spend all of our time? At work.
Yeah.
Right? We primarily spend all of our time at work. So where do you think the biggest impact is going to happen? At work. It's just a pure numbers perspective, right? So we want to meet people where they spend the most of their time, and we want to let them know that they matter, and we want them to unlock their God-given potential. We want them to go on a career trajectory where they could go from making livable wage. Note that I did not say minimum.
Right. Livable wage.
They have good benefits, right? Good perks. And through the course of their lifetime, they're getting training, they're getting development, they're getting all sort of programs that they're hopefully go from $17 an hour to $100,000 a year, right? And we put them on a career trajectory, right? That they're just obsessed working there. Small businesses, they don't say small on purpose, right? When a company launches, their dream is not to hit $20 million of revenue and then just grow 5% thereon after, right? So again, small businesses don't say small on purpose.
What are some of the common struggles you see with independently owned, family-owned businesses? Like, what are some of the lids? Because, pastors don't own churches, but we have a lot of entrepreneurs listening as well. But I find that there's a lot of common things that smaller to mid-sized organizations struggle with.
Oh, I think it's the same three. So we always say culture, tech, and sales, right? Okay. Culture, tech, and sales. Sometimes other things say people, processes, and technology. But at Garden City, we say the three areas that we help small businesses with, and I could put in parentheses, or that I speak to my pastor friends with, is culture, tech, and marketing, right? With culture, it's what does it look like to create and cultivate a thriving, healthy environment where everyone truly feels that they love their work, right? That not one day is work. A place that there are programs, trainings, and resources that serve them, that they could actualize their God-given potential, right? And if you do, if you think that that does not matter, right? Look at how much it matters to the bottom line. Turnover and hiring and onboarding and offboarding, it's one of the biggest costs. So expensive, right? And such a distraction. And also, if you want high customer satisfaction, you want raving fans, well, have raving employees first, right? So that's the first thing that we look at is we go to business owners and we say, the number one thing we want to do is cultivate and create an environment where people could thrive, prosper, and flourish. That might mean that you ask people that are in legal, do you like being in legal? And they go, between you and I, I'm obsessed with marketing, but I didn't go to school for marketing. I don't know a lot about marketing. The first thing we're going to do is figure out a way that we could put that woman or that guy in marketing, right? Because we know that they will thrive there, right? They will thrive there. Not one day will feel like work and they'll give us 10x the output. The second thing is technology, right? Helping implement new technology into the business or into the church. Technology is no longer a nice to have. It's a must have in order to be competitive in today's environment. You cannot compete without a strong technology strategy. If you do not have a 4-quarter or even better, a 6-quarter rolling technology strategy, you're in trouble. Right?
What is a 4-quarter or 6-quarter rolling technology strategy?
Sure. So there's 4 quarters in a year, right? Yeah. So every 3 months. And if you do not have a clear strategy that shows what you're doing every quarter or every year, or I prefer every 6 quarters, right, out, then you're left behind. So you have some churches that I speak to that I'm saying, so what are you guys doing for technology? They're like, oh, we rolled out PushPay and the video platform of Resi and whatever else.
Yeah, and we updated our website in 2017. So, yeah,
of course, and so we're doing good, but we're focusing on this new campaign, right? And the thing is, there is so much happening in technology through giving, through marketing, through videos, through whatever else it may be, HR internally, fundraising. There's so many things that you must have your fingers on the pulse to know what is out there. What could we do better? What's going to be less expensive? What's going to be a better member experience? What's going to be a better employee experience and so forth, right? So it's not just doing 1 or 2 things to check the box. It's at any given point, if you're on the board of a church or you're on the board of an organization, one of the first questions you should ask them in every board meeting is, are we going to talk today about what our strategy is in technology and what we have going on, right? And what's in the works. You should always either be sunsetting a technology, aka getting rid of a technology. You should either always be purchasing a technology. You should always be implementing a technology, right? Or you should always be evaluating a technology. At any given point, you should always be doing something in there.
Because that's your wheelhouse. Can you tell me what the sun is setting on right now? Like, what would be an example? Let's say we're going to that board meeting or that all staff meeting or the executive team meeting. What would be an example of something that's kind of 2019 and something that's rolling into the future?
Yeah. So I'll give you something just of today that I spoke with. So we're looking at a staffing company to invest into. And I just asked her, talk to me through your current technology system. And she said, well, we have a financial system. So we went away from QuickBooks and, a couple other systems. So I said, okay, let's just start in 2005. Do you have a CRM? And she's like, oh, that means customer something. Yeah, customer relationship management. It's like the biggest player in the world is called Salesforce. So how do you manage your top customers to know the opportunities you have currently on the docket with them, what products they're looking at, what new opportunities, the pricing, the discounts, the notes of that, who's working on that? How do you manage that? And the crazy part is that it's all through email and spreadsheets and all in your mind, right? And so we don't even need to get into 2020 technologies of artificial intelligence or machine learning or algorithms or AI or internet or connected devices. None of that. I mean, let's just go from 2005 and just work our way backwards, right? Do we have Facebook ad spend? Do we have an ERP system? Is there an HR system? For the companies we look at, do you have an invoicing system? Is there a dispatch system, right? All these sort of things. There's a whole plethora out there, right? I mean, I came from DocuSign. I asked people, how do you send out contracts? They're like, we open a Microsoft Word document. We fill it out. We download it on our desktop. We send it via email. Then the customer opens it. Then they sign it. Then they scan it. And they send it back to us. Then we have to print it. I'm like, that's crazy. So there's 100 things like Dropbox, or there's so many things. So I would just say, I don't know what your space is. But again, if you do not have a strategy right now that you know what you're implementing, what you're buying today or 4 quarters from now, you're in trouble, right? You're in trouble. And then lastly is sales, right? Or marketing. Right. You can't sell today the way they used to sell, right? There's so many things competing for people's eyeballs and attention. If you have not seen The Social Dilemma on Netflix, please watch it because it will let you know what's really highly recommended of what's really going on out there. So you need sustainable and scalable sales methodologies, right? And what got you from 0 to 10 million is not going to get you from 10 to 50 or 50 to 100, right? So you need to know for us in our businesses, We help business owners think through, how do you assign quotas for salespeople? Do you hire dedicated salespeople? What are their territories that they're responsible for? What are their comp packages, right? How do you create partners that are going to help spread the cause? So thinking through reimagining, as we say, reimagining and redeeming culture, tech, and sales.
Wow. And that's the stuff that everybody ignores, because it's like, really what I enjoy is I really enjoy selling flowers. What I really enjoy is preaching sermons. What I really enjoy is podcasting. I don't want to have to think about distribution, right? So that's sort of like, okay, that's great, Mike. I get it. But I want to find the carrot here. What is the difference, or is there a connection between a well-run business and an effective business? Do you know what I mean? To what extent does all of these things operating in the background, does that actually advance the mission, whatever your mission is? Is there a direct connection?
Yes. I absolutely believe that there's a difference between a well-run and an effective, scalable, or even a better word, sustainable business, right? I say a lot that 95% of the businesses I speak with, I call them owner hustles. Owner hustles. If they get hit by a bus, there's no business.
There's no business. No
weeks
business.
or a couple months.
And there's no church, and there's no organization. Somebody's left to pick up the pieces or just close it up, right?
Absolutely. I have so many friends that work in churches, and they say that the leader of the church, if they weren't there or they're not there for a week or a month, the whole place falls apart. Yeah. Right. So that is not a well-run, sustainable place. Now, it doesn't mean it can't exist, but it's something I ask many business owners is, do you believe you're the type of person who naturally wants to get a car to go from 0 to 50 miles per hour or 50 to 100 miles per hour? AKA, are you more of like a growth startup, kind of imaginative person, or are you more of a scale process, procedures type of person? Because those require two completely different types of people, right? So if you've built your business or church to a point that you have employees and members or customers and profitability and revenue, you should be extremely proud of yourself. I mean, that's an amazing accomplishment. You're an outlier. You're an entrepreneur that has achieved the impossible. But there's a big comma, right? Comma, however, you must now have the trust and the humility to find someone who's skilled at taking that car from 50 to 80 or 100 miles per hour, right? That's not your skill set. That's not your wheelhouse. And you're doing yourself and you're doing your people a disservice by staying in that position, right? The beautiful part is that this may actually allow you to go back to stay focused on your first love of creating new ideas, of innovation, of maintaining and cultivating those relationships that matter most to your company or to your church, right? But again, in order to overcome this, you must have self-realization about your strengths and your weaknesses.
You know, one of the things as you talk through this, I'm thinking about, what is the connection, or to what extent is there a connection between being a well-run organization and investor confidence or donor confidence? Because I can think of as someone who had the privilege of delivering checks to various charities at different times. I remember one instance where I was there and like the executive director of the charity was too busy to come and receive the check, and the place looked chaotic. And I'm like, should we be investing in this or not? And you're happy to do it. You're happy to, but like, oh my gosh, like to what extent? Because I'm thinking about that. One of the comments we had over the years at Connexus is, I remember we were touring our new facility a few years ago, and we were walking through the mayor and some town councilors. They're like, I feel like we're in Silicon Valley. Like, this is impressive for a city our size. But I have a feeling that is connected to confidence in people saying this is a good place to give, because the money's going to go somewhere, right? If you're a tither or a donor, but you want to feel good about that. Is that a connection? Am I overstating it? What do you think?
I think you're spot on, and you're a lot more kind and compassionate than I am, because if I walked into that place, I would have gone and find a new nonprofit to give to.
Yeah, I almost walked out the door. I'm like, I don't think it's a good use of money.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So the way that I see it is you only fall into two buckets: turnaround or further accelerate what's already in place. Right. So that would be a good question for leaders to ask themselves: is what type of organization do you truly believe that you're running? If someone else came in, are they going to have to turn this whole thing around? Or are they just going to want to say, wow, I want to put more gas on this, right? I want to further accelerate what's already in place. Me personally, I may further accelerate what's already in place, right? There's a lot of good companies out there. There's a lot of good leaders out there. I want to just further accelerate what people have already built. If you want to raise more capital from investors or donors, be committed to building a well-run, effective, excellent organization, right? Colossians 3:23, I think. And whatever you do, whether in word or deed, do it as a representative of Jesus, right? Giving thanks to him through Christ, or giving thanks to God through Christ, right? So in whatever you do, whether in word or deed, do it as a representative of Jesus. I mean, that's a pretty big thing. So if you're going to do it, I don't know about you, but if I was wearing a badge that said I'm on the team of Jesus, I'm going to do it pretty excellent. I'm going to cross my T's, dot my I's, and my office is going to look like Silicon Valley, right?
Yeah.
If it's well run, you will have no problem raising capital, right? People will want to further accelerate what you're doing, right? In regards to donor confidence, I don't know many donors who seek to invest in organizations that are not being run with excellence, right? Donors are looking to be stewards of their hard-earned capital, and they want to see their fruit multiply, right? I recently heard of a church that purchased over $10,000 of Christmas trees a couple of years ago, and the pastor changed a theme last minute, and they threw away that money. When I heard of that, it did not inspire me to want to invest there, right? So to me, that's not a well-run thing. They should have thought that out better, right? They should have been more thoughtful around that. However, there's many nonprofit organizations that are better run than for-profit organizations. Right? They have a clear charter. They have a strong management team, right? And they look at themselves like a for-profit organization. The only thing is they take the profits and they distribute it out to other causes. And so they're investing in people, processes, and technologies, right? And it's always clear to see the health of an organization, Carey, from the outside in. Last thing I'll say is my mother always told me this, and I don't know how healthy it is, but I do believe in it. What others probably think of you, they're probably right. You know, and I just think of
that's a really interesting thought.
Right, because I mean, from the outside, it speaks a lot, right? I mean, Carey, if you don't know me, and we're at a restaurant, and you make a first impression of my children, my wife, and I, whatever you probably think, chances are you're probably right. I mean, there's some outliers.
Yeah.
You're probably right.
And my life's kind of flashing through the decades, and I'm like, oh yeah, people would say different things of me in my 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. Like, yeah. I'm going to think about that. That's kudos to your mom. You're young, Mike, barely 32. You have a lot of influential investors in Garden City, and you've curated a lot of relationships. How do you curate and cultivate those relationships?
Yeah, this is by far my greatest strength. In life, I believe it's all about having real, authentic relationships. So whenever I first meet anyone, regardless of their title or position, I've always had this mindset that everyone is equal. Even before being a believer, I've always had this mindset that everyone poops and pees. I always say that everyone poops and pees and everyone dies, right? It's just the truth, right? So I've met two presidents now. And even when meeting with them and shaking their hands, I'm like, he poops, he pees, and he's going to die. You know, so we're equal for the most part. So that allows me not to put anyone on a pedestal, right? Mm-hmm. So even, or not put them on a pedestal, right? Right. So even if I speak to a service worker, I speak to him or her as the same fashion as Hort Schultze, Pat Gelsinger, you or Lecrae or anyone, right? So I don't approach the conversation with fear or with pride or with ego. I believe they're just as fortunate spending time with me as a son of God as I am with them, right? We both have something to offer each other. I show my imperfections out of the gates. I'm not scared to say things about my past. I have a stutter problem. I'm new to private equity. I'm young, right? I'm learning how to be a father of 3 children, so forth. I call this the gunfight. In all relationships, I strive, right? The sooner I can put my gun down, the other party's going to put their gun down.
Oh, that's interesting. And that's what vulnerability does.
Completely, right? So I try to put my gun down as quick as possible so that we could quickly start building a real meaningful relationship. And once you put your gun down, they'll quickly do the same. I mean, Drew Brees is one of my investors on the New Orleans Saints, and someone introduced us, and out of the gates, I just started talking about my vulnerabilities. I mean, it would be the stupidest thing to do if you were a private equity investor trying to raise capital, right? I mean, why would he ever do that?
Yeah. Because you would think it would undermine confidence, but it doesn't.
Of course, exactly. I'm like, yeah, everything was super expensive here. I took the call from the beach. I was like, everything's super expensive here. I got this really crappy little condo here. It's really bad. It doesn't have any air conditioning. We could only stay here for 4 nights, blah, blah, blah. Everything was sold out. Also, this just happened. I mean, I'm out of the gates. And he's like, oh man, let me tell you about what just happened to me with the media. All of a sudden, our guns are down quickly. We're building a true, authentic relationship, right? I'm truly curious, right? I ask more questions than they could ever ask of me. People call this building rapport. There's many books on it, right? Of the leaders eat last, right? And all these other things.
Simon Sinek's book.
Yeah, but for me, it's just authentic. I mean, life is short. People have lived many years. I just want to get to know them. So I ask 100 questions, right? Like I asked you, Carey, where do you live? Oh, on the lake. Oh, how far from the lake? What do you do on the lake? Like,
no, totally.
Right. And so it's just naturally building rapport, but it's got to come from a place of authenticity. And then the last 2 things is if I feel prompted, I invite them on the journey that I'm on. Right now, I'm on this journey of Garden City. So I naturally ask people, if I feel prompted, do you want to invest in Garden City? It's a holding company where all service workers thrive. And I don't see it as me asking for something. I see that I'm giving them a favor. I'm extending an invitation of them to join me on something that I'm very excited, that I believe so much about, that I've dedicated my life to in this current season. I mean, that's a big thing. If you're leading a church, when you're asking people for a donation or a contribution, are you asking them like feeling bad, or are you seeing it as you're extending an invitation to join you on something that you so deeply believe in, that you and your family are making these sacrifices? And the last thing is, I do what I say I'm going to do. I follow up. If I'm the one making the ask, I'm the one following up, right? And I rush to follow up before they do, right? Many times people's actions speak louder than words, and their actions ruins all the initial input that they put in the first place, right? So I follow up quickly. I make it very simple. People are busy, and I may even go a different route. In order to be vulnerable and authentic and build a relationship, I might not even follow up on email. I might follow up on text message, because now I'm breaking into them by saying, hey, the whole email world, that's an easy world to engage in. I'm not going directly into your DMs as the millennials would call it, right? I'm going direct into your text message. And now immediately it kicks off this true, authentic, intimate relationship that's built to last.
I subscribed to different newsletters, and early on when we met, well, it was fairly recently, but I immediately subscribed to your newsletter, and it's good. I do this, I unsubscribe from a lot of stuff, but there's a few I really look forward to. And I would say you would probably be at the top of the list or near the top of the list for really curious, interesting, I didn't know that. So it's almost like if you subscribe to Tim Ferriss's 5 Bullet Friday, it's kind of a version of that where you'll bring some articles from The Hustle or different things. But I'm like, there was one on like how McDonald's turned it around. And then an article that you linked to on automation of telephone operators in the 1920s. Like, I'm like, whoa, this is like right field, left field, all over the place. But I loved it because you took me out of my normal box and into places. I'd love to talk to you about that curiosity and your habit of curation. Why do you read that stuff? Where do you find it? Why do you send that out? It's like, I really look forward to that newsletter.
Yeah. Einstein said, if you stop learning, then you start dying. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to start dying. So and so I think it's important to know what really piques your interest. For us, talking about the bowling alley example, the bowling alley strategy, at Garden City, we only buy service companies. That's it. Only service companies, only family owned. So for our newsletter, we're only going to do a newsletter on service companies. So McDonald's is a service company. The automation company is a service company. So we only focus on service companies. We don't say anything out about motivation or culture or anything like that at all, So just know your audience.
That's your filter.
Our filter is called the Service Report. You go on our website and look at it and sign up for it. It only comes out once every 2 weeks, and we spend a lot of time curating it. People support what they help create. So how do we do it? People curate articles and they send them to us all the time.
So that's not just you going, oh, I'm going to clip that and put that in a newsletter, yet your team collaboratively putting it together.
Yeah, our team goes through all of them, and we just say less is more. And so we never do more than 10. Typically, it's 5 to 8. We know people are busy, and so we do that. But learning's everything, right? I always have a little notepad on my phone every time someone tells me to read a book, and I just quickly write it down. I think it's really important for people to know what it is that piques your interest. I figured that out a couple of years ago, that for me, it's nonfiction stories, nonfiction books based on the historical narrative, the historical story of someone's life, lessons learning. So I'm reading Bob Iger's book from Disney, The Ride of a Lifetime. I love it, right? I love it, love it, love it. As Warren Buffett said, it's good to learn from your own mistakes, but it's better to learn it from others' mistakes.
Yeah.
Constantly learning.
Mike, this has been so fascinating. What anything else you want to share, or what is one question nobody ever asked you that you wish people would ask you?
Wow. What is one question that nobody asked me that I wish people would ask me? Is all the success worth it?
Wow.
Yeah, I think that's the question.
And?
No, it's not. No, it's not. I think the real currency is looking at your children when you're older, and for them to say, Dad and Mom, I don't know how you guys did it, but you crushed it. 10 out of 10. Come over here and give me a kiss and a hug. I just hope that I could be a decimal of what you were to me. And that comes at a cost. Every yes, there's a no, right? Every yes, there's a no. And so when you say yes to success and to accomplishment and to building, you're saying no to other things. There's going to be less vacations. There's going to be less times on the baseball field. There's going to be less coming home. There's going to be less dinners. There's going to be less fill in the blank, right? And that's the juggling act, right? Which takes so much prayer, takes so much discernment, takes so much wisdom from others, takes so much humility to say, who is my audience? Truly, who is my audience? And can I finish this ride well? And look in the rearview mirror and say, well done, well done. So that's the question that no one asked me, is all of it worth it? It's a constant battle, I think, for anyone that is experiencing success, an athlete, a business person, a church leader, so forth, is how do you balance that well so that it does not become your God or idol?
Mike Arrieta, it's been a joy. Thank you so much. People are going to want to follow you. You're a great follow. So website, where are you on social? Let us know.
Yeah. I got off social a couple of years ago. The only social I'm on is LinkedIn. So you could find me on LinkedIn.
Decision behind that? It was distracting, not good for you. What?
I was part of a quick story. I was part of a prayer group in Silicon Valley. A lot of people that I won't mention what companies they were at, but prior NSA and stuff like that all work at massive tech firms. And let's just say nobody in that group is on social anymore. Yeah, it was a pretty big thing for us. So I just know my weaknesses, and I'm not strong enough to properly have discipline to balance that out. So for me, it's just easier to not get close to it.
Wow.
So
thank you.
So that's that. But but go to our website. It's joingardencity.com. And you could shoot me an email at michael@joingardencity.com or add me on LinkedIn. Would love to connect and be helpful in any way that I can. And just always remember that life is short. Time is ticking. We don't know which page of our book we're on. You might be on the last page, last chapter. So live every day like it's your last and trust in God.
Thanks, Mike.
See you, brother.
Well, I hope today's episode was helpful to you. You can always get more by subscribing to my channel. I also have a lot more content over at CareyNieuwhof.com for leaders in business and leaders in churches. And you can get transcripts of this episode there and so much more, plus some other stuff I do for leaders. So head on over there to discover more at CareyNieuwhof.com. And in the meantime, I really hope our time together today has helped you lead like never before.